In November of 1913, a storm unlike any other descended on the Great Lakes. Despite not forming over the world's massive oceans, it rivaled the strength of a hurricane with ferocious winds, blinding snow, and towering 35-foot, or 11-meter waves. Imagining what it might be like to be on a ship in those conditions is truly something. This is the story of the White Hurricane, and viewer discretion is advised. For many, lakes might conjure images of calm waters, gentle waves, and shorelines visible in every direction. However, for those familiar with North America's Great Lakes, the reality is different. Anyone who has experienced a storm on one of these lakes knows they are significantly different. The Great Lakes, bordering parts of the United States and Canada, constitute the largest group of freshwater lakes on the planet, covering a total area of 94,000 square miles, or 244,000 square kilometers. They hold an astounding 21% of the entire world's freshwater by volume. For perspective, this amount of water spread across the entire continent of North America would be 5 feet deep everywhere. The lakes known as the Great Lakes are Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. Their incredible size makes them behave more like seas or even small oceans. Distant horizons are common, and the waters can be more than just a little choppy. Rolling waves, strong winds, and currents are also not uncommon, and they can reach great depths. The deepest part of the Great Lakes is in Lake Superior, reaching 1,332 feet, or 406 meters. Another unique aspect of the Great Lakes is that, similar to oceans, their size causes them to cool slower in winter and warm slower in summer. While shorelines freeze during winter, the central parts of each lake usually do not fully freeze. This, along with their total area, contributes to their unique weather ecosystem, often manifesting as lake effect snow. This can occur between late fall and early spring, resulting from westerly winds picking up warmer air and moisture from the lake's surface. As this warmer, wetter air meets colder, drier air on the coast, moisture concentrates, sometimes producing heavy snowfall. While meteorologists can identify conditions favorable for lake effect snow, accurately predicting its duration and snowfall amount can be difficult. This is especially crucial for cargo freighters, as the Great Lakes have long been important for the shipping industry. All lakes are interconnected by natural waterways, providing ports as far west as Duluth, Minnesota, access to the St. Lawrence River in eastern New York State. While technology and systems for weather forecasting have significantly improved, this was not the case over a century ago. In 1913, the Weather Bureau, now the National Weather Service, was operational, but its methods were primitive compared to modern news channels. A particular challenge with the Great Lakes is their unpredictability. By the time observations were made and readings taken, hand-drawn weather maps for ship captains could easily be outdated by distribution. This was even true for signal stations using flags, pennants, and lanterns to indicate changing conditions in Great Lakes harbors. Typically, signal combinations would inform ship captains about the next 24 hours, including wind speed, direction, and potential precipitation. This information helped them plan courses or avoid the worst conditions. Tragically, weather models or signal systems at the time were inadequate to handle the magnitude of what arrived in November 1913. November in the Great Lakes region can be a month of significant seasonal change for the northern Midwest and Northeast United States and parts of Canada. When the 470-foot steamer LC Waldo departed from a Minnesota port on November 7th, the weather was calm, and temperatures were warm for the season. The ship was heading to Ohio with a crew of 22, including the captain's wife and her mother, and a ship dog, carrying a full load of iron ore. Cargo companies usually rush to fulfill orders in November before winter and the shipping season closure. As the Waldo set out for a routine trip through Lake Superior, Lake Huron, and Lake Erie, no one anticipated the trouble brewing. Cold, dry air from Canada was moving south, and warm, moist air was heading north from the Gulf of Mexico. Their collision created a growing, massive weather system. As cold air moved into the Great Lakes, it began to gather moisture from the warmer waters, causing the storm to spin like a hurricane. Unfortunately, when the storm strengthened on November 6th, the Weather Bureau predicted only moderate to brisk winds for the 7th with occasional rain. This mild forecast did not deter Captain John W. Duddleson of the Waldo from delivering iron ore to Ohio. Many other ship captains shared this view and proceeded as usual in the Great Lakes shipping lanes. However, by 10 a.m. on November 7th, it became clear to the 112 Weather Bureau signal stations around the Great Lakes that conditions were rapidly deteriorating. The weather system moving into western Lake Superior was quickly heading toward Lake Michigan and gaining intensity. Signal stations and ports hoisted a square red flag with a black center and a red pennant. This indicated to captains storm winds from the southwest at 55 miles, or 89 kilometers per hour. The western Great Lakes region faced these winds, and by nightfall, Lake Superior stations reported sustained winds of 60 miles, or 97 kilometers per hour, with gusts up to 80 miles, or 130 kilometers per hour. Hurricane-force winds are defined as exceeding 74 miles, or 119 kilometers per hour. The storm was already at hurricane strength. The largest waves on the Great Lakes can reach 35 feet, or 10 meters high, almost the height of the Waldo. In waves that size, a ship in the trough between waves appears surrounded by water walls in all directions. The Waldo, already well into Lake Superior, could not miss the increasing winds as the storm caught up. The lake's waters turned to violent whitecaps, followed by precipitation. Heavy snow and icy rain reduced visibility for Captain John and his crew. Sustained 60-mile-per-hour winds created huge waves that broke against the bow, further complicating conditions. Water constantly streamed across the deck, and rapidly falling temperatures caused it to freeze. The Waldo soon became encased in ice, adding significant weight as it rocked violently in the turbulent lake. By 9 p.m., conditions worsened to the point that Captain John steered by compass alone. For the next 3 hours, the crew focused on keeping the ship upright and on course. At midnight, the captain examined the map for shelter from the storm. Manitou Island, about midway across Lake Superior, appeared to offer some safety. However, as the Waldo turned toward the island, a massive rogue wave struck the ship's side with such force it nearly destroyed the pilot house. The damage was so significant it disabled navigational equipment, exposing those inside to the harsh elements. Without a compass, Captain John and the crew were in danger, but he knew of a spare in a lifeboat. Retrieving it was perilous due to the completely iced-over deck. Still, the compass was essential for any hope of reaching safety. A crew member was sent to get it, skating and stumbling across the deck as the Waldo rocked violently. He managed to reach the lifeboat, find the compass, and carefully return to the damaged pilot house. Captain John continued towards Manitou Island, unaware of further dangers ahead. West of Manitou Island was a barely submerged rock islet called Gull Rock, essentially a sharp peak of an underwater mountain shown on charts, but requiring visual spotting to avoid. Relentless snow, darkness, and the lake's violence made it impossible for lookouts to see Gull Rock. Adding to their problems, the ship's rudder failed, leaving the Waldo unsteerable and helpless. Just as Manitou Island might have provided salvation, the Waldo slammed into Gull Rock in the early hours of November 8th. As November 8th began, the Weather Bureau's morning report upgraded the storm to severe. Those on the lake were already experiencing this reality. The storm had expanded to cover the entire Lake Superior basin. Moving east over Lake Michigan, winds reached gale force, just under 40 miles, or 63 kilometers per hour. Gale wind flags were displayed at signal stations, but many ship captains continued, believing their vessels could withstand gale force conditions. Those already on the lake knew differently. Aboard the Waldo, chaos reigned after the collision with Gull Rock, but this presented Captain John with an idea. He decided to keep the engines running to maintain the ship's position on the rock. He reasoned that the worst outcome was the waves pushing the Waldo back into open water, causing more damage. Ordering full power to the engines, the bow became firmly lodged on Gull Rock. However, the engine force increased pressure on the already damaged steel hull, weakening and tearing it. A large horizontal crevasse developed on the deck, nearly reaching the ship's midpoint. With the Waldo taking on water, most might have abandoned ship, but Captain John saw another opportunity. To prevent the ship from being dislodged from the rock, he ordered the lower compartments to be flooded. This strategy seemed to work, and the Waldo remained firmly in place. With the ship stabilized, the priority shifted to ensuring everyone's safety. The safest place appeared to be an interior room just below the first deck, near the bow. As orders were given, many crew members rushed to this room. Several tried to guide the two women aboard, but they initially refused to leave the stern. Reaching the room required traversing the icy deck, braving the storm for hundreds of feet, and crossing the widening crack threatening to split the Waldo in two. Crewmen agreed to carry the two women. It was a perilous journey, but they reached the room safely. Almost immediately after everyone gathered in the room, the crack in the hull widened, and the stern broke off and sank, leaving the bow of the Waldo powerless. Fortunately, the bow remained stuck on Gull Rock, but with no power, there was no heat to keep the crew warm. The passengers of the Waldo were trapped in a small room in Lake Superior, amidst the worst storm in the lake's history. As the crew assessed their situation, a ship's engineer believed he could create a stove from onboard materials. He and several crew members went to the captain's quarters to detach the bathtub. They carried it back to the room while others collected fire buckets and removed their bottoms. They flipped the bathtub upside down, then used the buckets to build a stovepipe leading out a porthole. Once assembled, they started a fire using ship's wood, providing some warmth in the cold room. Throughout the day, crewmen tore apart ship sections for firewood while others moved around to stay warm. While the Waldo crew struggled for survival on Lake Superior, Lake Huron to the southeast began experiencing the initial bands of the White Hurricane. Captains who left port on the morning of November 8th under gale force warnings deeply regretted their decisions by the night of November 9th. Early on November 9th, conditions seemed typical for a November gale. Barometric pressure rises at some signal stations even hinted at the storm lifting, a false hope. The Weather Bureau issued reports twice daily, morning and evening. Between reports, captains relied on their observations for weather assessment. The 8 a.m. report on November 9th contained nothing to deter more ships from entering the Great Lakes. Unbeknownst to the Weather Bureau, a second low-pressure system had formed over the Carolinas. Moving rapidly northwest after passing over Washington, D.C. strong winds ahead of the system fueled the existing storm on the Great Lakes, intensifying the winds. By 2 p.m. that afternoon, Buffalo, New York, reported 80-mile or 130-kilometer-per-hour winds on Lake Erie as the new low-pressure system rotated northwest. As the two storms converged, winds intensified. By late afternoon, ships on Lake Huron raced for shelter to escape the massive waves. Many could not outrun the forming waves. At 8 p.m., the Weather Bureau's second report was too late to prevent disaster. The two storms were colliding, bringing hurricane-force winds constantly changing direction and blinding snow, obscuring visibility beyond windshields. The report revealed the four western lakes, Superior, Michigan, Huron, and Erie, under a weather system unprecedented in its intensity. Winds at Harbor Beach, Michigan, on Lake Huron's coast, gusted up to 90 miles or 140 kilometers per hour. On the hurricane scale, the White Hurricane would have been a strong Category 1. In just 6 hours on the night of November 9th, 8 ships capsized or sank, claiming 187 lives. While the White Hurricane moved eastward on November 9th, conditions at Gull Rock remained severe for the Waldo survivors. With food and water in an inaccessible part of the ship, the situation could quickly become critical if prolonged. They were unsure if their position or wreck was known on land. Fortunately, land authorities were aware of the Waldo situation, possibly through a passing ship or local sightings. Rescue stations mobilized to save those aboard despite the horrific weather. At Eagle Harbor, the larger, more seaworthy rescue boat was under repair, forcing them to use a smaller 26-foot motorized vessel. Launching into the storm, regardless of boat size, was perilous. The Great Lakes Rescue Station's motto was, "You have to go out, but you don't have to come back." Even with this courageous spirit, a local at Eagle Harbor predicted the rescue team's demise. They pushed into Lake Superior, tossed by rough waters. Progress was slow. After about 8 miles or 13 kilometers from Eagle Harbor, their small motor became completely iced over, forcing them to return. Back at the station, the boat was so encrusted in ice that some rescuers were frozen to their seats and had to be freed with axes. Despite this, they quickly prepared the larger boat, hoping for a successful rescue mission. At Portage Harbor, farther from the wreck site, the rescue team fared no better initially. Headed directly into fierce winds, they were turned back. Instead of returning to the station, they found an inland waterway to the south side of the peninsula, near Gull Rock. This allowed them to use northerly winds in an attempt to reach the Waldo. By November 10th, the two powerful storms had merged. That morning, the storm moved over London, Ontario, trailing bands of relentless lake-effect snow. Further south in Cleveland, Ohio, on Lake Erie's shore, 17 inches or 43 centimeters of snow fell that day, with 6-foot or almost 2-meter snowdrifts caused by winds. Even inland, many were stranded. Streetcar operators were stuck in their vehicles for 2 nights due to ongoing lake-effect snow. Finally, on November 11th, the storm weakened as it moved away from the Great Lakes and its source of intensity. On this day, rescue crews from Eagle Harbor and Portage reached the Waldo wreck. Despite being only about 30 miles from the wreck, the Portage crew traveled over 80 miles via the inland route. Even with the storm passing, waves remained large, making it difficult to tie rescue boats to the wreck. During one attempt, the Portage boat scraped Gull Rock, raising concerns about taking on water. The Eagle Harbor team successfully maneuvered their larger boat against the Waldo's hull. As the boats were secured, a rescuer removed his boots, hoping wool socks would provide better traction, as the Waldo's bow looked like an Ice Age relic, completely encased in frozen lake water. Once aboard, rescuers shouted, hoping for survivors to respond. Inside the small room, the shouts lifted the spirits of weakened, hungry, and dehydrated survivors. They called back, and rescuers located them. A new challenge arose. Ice had encased the room door both inside and out. While rescuers outside hacked at the ice with axes, a survivor inside did the same. Eventually, they chipped away enough ice to open the door. Rescuers carefully guided the trapped people onto the rescue ships. Incredibly, all 24 people and the ship's dog survived. Captain John's decision to run engines full bore to wedge the Waldo on Gull Rock proved crucial for survival. The Waldo remained stuck on Gull Rock until the following spring. The White Hurricane's devastation became apparent in the following days. At least 19 ships were destroyed, and another 19 were stranded. Among those lost, 12 sank, many of which were the newest and largest on the Great Lakes. More devastating was the loss of life. On land and lakes, 250 people died, with 75 of deaths occurring in the 6 hours of November 9th night. Total damage cost was around $4.8 million, equivalent to $149 million today adjusted for inflation. In 2013, for the storm's 100-year anniversary, meteorologists and scientists simulated the White Hurricane's power using historical Weather Bureau documents and available data. Their findings revealed wind gusts over 80 miles, or 129 kilometers per hour, and 36-foot, or 11-meter waves on Lake Huron. Astoundingly, these conditions lasted for extended periods. Lake Superior endured hurricane-like conditions for 20 hours, Lake Erie for 16, Michigan for 13, and Huron for 10. The White Hurricane remains the most destructive and deadliest natural disaster in Great Lakes history.